A man chooses, a slave obeys.
Welcome to the Ethics in Video Games podcast, where we explore issues at the intersection of ethics and video games.
What follows is a series of graphic, interactive scenes that we can't show you.
Welcome, everybody. We're here today with Elena Petrovskaya. She's a PhD researcher at the Center for Intelligent Games and Game Intelligence in the UK. She specializes in predatory monetization in digital games and its consequences, and is particularly interested in the links of game design to gaming disorders. She uses her background in psychology and human-computer interaction to take player-centric perspective. Developing knowledge bottom up and working directly with players as the primary stakeholder. So she's looking out for players here. Her work spans ethics, well-being, and the lived experience of technology and its use. Elena's work has been published in high-impact venues. She's been giving invited talks, contributed to written evidence calls by the UK government, and engaged with the public through media outlets such as The Conversation. I love me The Conversation. All right, Elena Petrovskaya, welcome to the show. Yeah!
Thank you.
All right, so we're here to really talk about the study that you've done that really looked at monetization issues. We're going to talk about, you're calling this predatory monetization, and we'll talk about them. But the idea essentially is you did a study where you were looking at monetization issues that the players you surveyed described as misleading, unfair, or aggressive. I'm assuming these are choices that did you ask them give me things that you think are misleading, unfair, or aggressive? Yeah,
that's exactly it. So we had to figure out a way that we could conceptualize predatory for the purposes of this study, because the term itself, I'm sure we'll get onto that later, but it can be quite a tricky term and people have different understandings of it. So the angle that we took was looking specifically at consumer protection in the UK. And so we looked at, as far as I'm aware, one of the only consumer protection laws that is applicable in this context of gaming. And they focus specifically on these three terms: unfair, misleading, and aggressive. So we structured the survey in that way. We asked what microtransactions have you encountered that can be conceptualized as unfair, as misleading, and we gave them the specifically worded terms from the regulations as well, so that we had this justification for our method. Ultimately.
Interesting that that's where it comes from. It seems to me that aggressive really differs from the first two, right? I mean, it's not necessarily bad to be aggressive. It's wrong to mislead me or to treat me unfairly, but what does it mean to be aggressive in this context? So we're talking about microtransactions. What are we talking about, and how is it also supposed to be a bad way to treat players if you're treating them aggressively?
I'm just curious, actually, before I give you my answer, why do you not think that aggressive is bad? Because to me, aggressive in itself as a word has quite negative connotations, because it implies the use of force in a way which may influence the other person's behavior.
It's interesting. It seems to imply the use of force, but I'm thinking about how a game could be aggressive. And I'm thinking about, let's say, a game like American football, where aggression could be part of the game. Yeah, to me, aggression in a game context can be fun. But that doesn't mean it's appropriate and fun in other contexts too. So when we're thinking of aggressive marketing, for example, right? A lot of times, so what comes to my mind is, for example, marketing that's really in your face. Now, is in your face the same thing as forcing you? That depends maybe on the context. And I'm not saying, and I'm not taking a position on it. I'm not really sure what I think about the aggressiveness. But that's why I asked. But the assumption is that aggressive marketing is bad marketing. Is that the idea? Or aggressive monetization is bad monetization?
So actually, yeah, interestingly, that's maybe the distinction is, you said aggression within a game context might be good, it might be fun. I think this definition here is when we're looking at the game itself, or elements of design relating to the game are aggressive towards the player, which then becomes a different dynamic. Because the player might just be trying to play the game, whether or not it's single player or multiplayer, and they're experiencing these pressures from the game environment itself. I think, tying that back to what we're talking about with aggressive marketing, that is one of the forms of problematic monetization we found, aggressive advertising, where it's players described it as being harassed by these adverts when they were trying to make their way through the game, and they're just constantly seeing these ads popping up, and it was just interfering with their gaming experience to the point where they felt like actively uncomfortable by this advertising. But ultimately, this all again ties back to the wording from these regulations that we based this on, and the exact definition is: an aggressive tactic is one which significantly impairs the average consumer's freedom of choice through the use of harassment, coercion, or undue influence, and may force them to make a transactional decision they would not have made otherwise. So again, it's about these ideas of harassment and pressure and coercion. Like, they feel almost bullied into making these purchases.
Right. That's interesting in the context of advertising, which is specifically designed to persuade and coerce.
Right. Yeah. That's the idea. So,
if it works, then it's illegal.
I think, well, good advertising, I think, works it's an interesting question because, like, where is the line? But good advertising makes you think that you want to do something rather than like almost bullying you into doing this thing.
Yeah,
I think if you still have the freedom of choice ultimately. If you see like a really good advert and it's really highlighted the qualities of this thing and you really want to buy it, that's, at the end of the day, no one's like interfering with your experience of watching TV and constant, like, I mean,
That's
some
right.
adverts are, but
And the best
like,
advertising just tells me that something's available.
some people have argued that any advertising that is not just informational, the way you put it, Andy, right, is manipulative, right? So most ads focus mostly on emotion, right? Rather than information. Right. Because of that, some people have said that all advertising is manipulative. That doesn't just give you the straightforward information. Though most people don't take that kind of situation, right? The situation is more complicated. You're watching an ad, there's there are contextual elements involved here. But I think it's really interesting how the government, the UK government specifically defined aggressive in this way. So let's use it the way that they defined it, which really makes sense as coercive. I'm not I'm not sure I would agree with that particular definition, but it makes sense that if that's what they want to highlight, right? Coercion, fair, like you're unfair, like you're being forced to do something. Okay, so let's think about that as we keep going and look at these microtransaction.
Sorry, can I just add one more thing? I think so someone mentioned expectations earlier, and like I think that's partly what this whole framework is actually based around, is player expectations from the gameplay experience. If their expectations don't involve this type of advertising, then they might see it as aggressive. Whereas in other contexts, you might expect advertising and therefore it's fine. So that might be one thing to think about as to how we differentiate between the two.
And we might also think of different games, right? So, where you might accept some sort of monetization scheme in a free-to-play game, you might not, in your, EA Battlefront 2. So, yeah, those contexts, I think, also really matter. All right. So can't wait to get in these. But before we do, so you took all these complaints and you categorized them and you made this incredibly useful taxonomy, right, into 35 different issues categorized under 8 different domains. Can we go? 35 different issues is a lot, but can we go over each domain to get an idea of the sort of things that we're talking about?
Okay, yeah. So first we have game dynamics designed to drive spending, which may seem like quite a nebulous concept, but you got to remember that this is based on what the players perceive to be distinct categories, and that refers to situations where players literally feel like the whole game, the game environment, and the game mechanics and dynamics and the way you do things evolve over time into trying to engage players with spending money on the game rather than for a progressively good player experience.
Can you give us a couple of examples from that category?
Sure. So sort of the most prominent from that category are, we have pay or grind, which is where the game essentially offers the player a choice between either playing to achieve a certain objective for what some may consider to be an overly long length of time, or alternatively, they can spend an amount of money and skip this grinding period and just achieve this objective by doing so. And then another example could be pay or wait, And that's things like energy timers, for example, in things like Candy Crush, where you maybe have like a certain amount of goes on a level, and then if you run out of goes, you can either wait like 24 hours or you can pay and you can keep playing there and then.
Yeah, and I can add to this category that in the industry there is a philosophy, and it seems true on its face, that if you're going to build, this, if this is the way you're going to monetize your game, you have to build your game from the ground up this way. Like this is a core principle for the game design.
Right. So you build the game around that business model. Right.
Yeah. For sure. Like you do with any other game.
Really quick to add other things in there, because it's interesting, because pay or grind or pay or wait are things that I think everybody's familiar with. The third thing you have in there, I got to ask, is the nerf cycle, because I have no idea what the nerf cycle is. What is the nerf cycle?
Yeah. So the nerf cycle, as players described it, was when you might buy like an item in the game, which is meant to be really high powered, or like a new character, or something like that, and then in the next game update, this item or character is rendered essentially worthless, and there's a new character or item that becomes the top of the food chain, and if you want to stay on the same level, you have to then buy this new thing as well. So it's essentially just buying these high powered things that are no longer high powered after quite a short amount of time.
Okay.
Right.
Driving,
and this can happen slowly too. There's a now that I understand, Warhammer, which is a tabletop game, is frequently accused of this sort of inflation, right? Where they're not, since it's a tabletop game, they can't go and give you an update and lower the values of things. But what they can do is the new thing is just slightly more powerful, and over time you can't compete anymore unless you're constantly buying the new thing.
Okay, Elena, I know I just asked you to give me 2 examples, but now I'm looking down the list and I'm like, these are all so interesting. Okay, so we got the nerf cycle. The next one is game builds dependency on microtransactions. So what do you mean here by building a dependency on microtransactions?
But this one's a little harder to explain, because I'm, again, mostly going off like player accounts and player perceptions, but it's when players feel like once that microtransactions are gradually sort of introduced into the game, like they might be able to play without spending or spending very little, and then somehow suddenly when they're in the later stages of the game, they're constantly having to spend money to do this, or otherwise they literally just can't play to the same extent anymore.
Oh, so it's a slow on-ramp.
Yeah, exactly. It gets you hooked in.
Right. I feel that. I'm all thinking about my Clash Royale game that that I've been into heavily for the last couple of months, and and how much money I'm spending at this point.
And again, I've seen talks where people have said that once you know that a player will spend $1, you know that they'll spend $20, and so you can there is some pressure then to like all right, classify people into 2 groups: people who are willing to pay and people who are not willing to pay. And this is in the free-to-play model of games.
Okay, so to keep going, the next one seems really simple: unfair matchups. Right? I'm assuming this just means they're matching you up with someone that you just can't beat unless you pay some money to upgrade yourself. Right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, some of the time, and a large chunk of the time, it's probably someone who has spent money to get this thing that you also now need to spend money to get. So it really gets you.
And you get sunken costs here as well, right? I've already spent money, and now I can't even win these matchups. I got to spend more. Then the free game experience is underpowered. I'm assuming the free game experience, you just can't get anywhere with it.
Well, pretty much, yeah. It's just no point playing the game, really. It's just not the same game if you're not spending money.
And that seems just like bad game design, honestly, to me.
Yeah.
Because like your free game is meant to be the attraction to playing the other game. But if the free game is not fun,
you quit.
Who's going to play the
you quit pretty quickly.
Game?
That's the thing. I think some of those games are just badly designed because they're just designed as money-making mechanisms, and people know that. So that's why some games actually aren't that successful, because they're not that clever. with this kind of thing.
Right. So the idea is, create a tricky design that the player will not be aware of. Is once the player is aware, the gig is up.
Not to give anyone tips here, but yeah, the more dangerous games do that, I think.
Mm-hmm. All right. The last one seems the worst. Payment needed to avoid negative consequences. I've never actually seen that in the game. How does that happen? So if you don't buy something bad's going to happen to you?
Yeah, pretty much. I think this was quite rare, to be honest. I only saw it pop up in like a fairly small fraction of the instances, but it seems to be the case that with some games you periodically have a situation where you risk losing certain things you've accrued in the game or maybe paid for already unless you make a further payment. And I'm sure that's integrated into design somehow, as in like into the storyline in some way. But yeah, that is essentially the gist of it.
So I have an interesting story about this, because this was there was there's an app, basically a choose your own adventure style app called Choices. Actually, I think there are several of them. I don't remember exactly which one we were talking about specifically, but we were writing the ethical monetization paper that came out 5-6 years ago now. We were talking about this, and it was one of these choose your own adventures. So you're following the story about these two characters, and they're in a relationship, but they're also spies, and so it's all very exciting. And then you get to a point, and frequently the choices are you read through, and it's basically read through the story, and then you get a choice. And frequently the choices are A, you can do this, B, you can do this, or C, you can pay $1 and do this other thing. Okay. Or you pay a token and you buy the tokens, and the tokens cost about $1. Right. And so in one case, so you're following along, you've got these two lovers and who are also spies, and then the choices are, somebody comes in and fires a gun, but you get to pick who dies. Choice A, she dies. Choice B, he dies. Or choice C, for $1, they can both survive.
And the story can't continue without both of them, right?
You're right. It seems so awful, and we were just so enraged at the idea of this thing. But then I was talking to one of my colleagues, one of my former bosses, and I told her this story, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, that sounds so great, because then I have the power to save them. And it only cost me $1."
That's
so
not
she
fair.
had a totally different, like her reaction to it was totally different.
I don't think many players would see it that way.
No, maybe not.
Right. It sounds like there's attachment, right? As you play a game, you become attached to things in the game. It might be your character, it might be the other characters in the game. Well, and then be so callous about, because there's that attachment is something that can be harmed.
Right.
It's just cruel. It's cruel at that point.
It does feel cruel.
Yeah.
That's a great example, Andy. I love that. Okay, so notice all these are game dynamics designed to drive spending. I think it's pretty easy to see how these are supposed to go, right? Okay. I thought that was everything, but no, there's 7 more categories. All right. So what's our second category, Lena?
The second is the product not meeting expectations. This one, so essentially just refers to situations where a player is expecting to buy something in the game, or in some cases, the game itself maybe, and they just get something that's not quite what they were promised, or not quite what they were led to believe that they would be getting in this purchase. So a couple of examples. So one is maybe where you buy something in the game, say a skin, and you have no kind of warning that you actually already have this item, and you just make the purchase again, and it's just essentially useless to you at that point because you already own it and you're still allowed to make the purchase. And people feel like this is really unfair or misleading.
So the idea is that they're leaving it up to you to make that determination, or they're hiding your inventory so you can't check?
I mean, I don't think they're probably maybe not games and explicitly hiding your inventory, but players just feel like they should be told if they already have this thing that would render the purchase useless to them if they're about to spend money.
And they might not have tried to hide. They might not be trying to hide the inventory, but by the fact that they have a purchase screen up, it probably means that you can't actually go back and look at your inventory.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Do things like loot boxes that tend to give you the same damn cards count as part of this?
Well, so we actually explicitly avoided I can't remember exactly how we phrased it, but we explicitly said we didn't want to know about loot boxes.
I see.
In this, because we wanted to know about all other microtransactions that might, because there's already been so much talk about loot boxes. So I think they would to an extent, and there's a whole other conversation, but we don't know for sure from this.
Right. And in that situation, that you're getting something random, you might be getting something, but it's more like, when I go to my local comic shop, I will sometimes accidentally purchase a copy of especially if it's got a new cover, and a lot of comics now have multiple covers. So I might get a duplicate comic that I already have. They have a list of all the comics that I've bought from them ever, because they track all this. And so they could check this, because it would be extra work and whatever.
Yeah, interesting. Because that one seems like an easy fix. If you're looking to buy something, you might look to buy another thing instead, though maybe not.
Right. Now, the comic shop is good enough to where, like, I can take it back next week and I say, oh, I got a duplicate. And they're like, okay. And they'll just refund it and it's fine.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think maybe, I don't know how the refund system works in those games that whoever was talking about this talks about, but maybe in some games you just can't get a refund in the same way that you might get a refund for a physical thing. And that's why it feels more misleading.
Okay. All right. So the second one here seems pretty simple. Product doesn't incorporate everything the player believes it to be. Think you're getting X, but really you're getting Y.
Exactly.
Then early access content. You end up with something different. Can you explain what the early access content issue is?
Yeah, so this relates more to whole games, I think, where people have to pay a certain amount of money to. So they purchase early access content, and when it comes to the full version, they end up with either something completely different to what they might be expecting, or the full version just never comes and they feel a little bit betrayed by it. Yeah, so that's referring to the whole game more so than a specific microtransaction.
Okay.
Right.
And then the next one is also pretty simple. Buying something you don't want to get something you do want.
Yeah.
Do you have an example of this?
On one hand, it just feels like bad game design. Like, if they could sell me the thing that I want, why are they bothering? I mean, all of these things are virtual, right? So we're talking about virtual goods.
Right.
Right. So
because if we can get you to take that one more step, we can sell you yet another thing.
Right. It's not like they're just trying to like liquidate their inventory. It's a virtual item.
Right.
So this example that the person in the paper used is basically like in terms of leveling up characters. They might have one character that they might want to level up, but first they have to pay to level up a bunch of other characters for some reason, which they just don't see the reason for.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting example.
Can't level up A until you've leveled up B, C, and D.
Exactly.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
Then we have a separate re-release of product as free, cheaper, or easier to get. Okay.
Yeah.
So you've already paid for the product and then it gets a re-release. That's free.
Exactly. And it's free. Yeah. Like a month later.
I
see that on Kickstarter. In the board game, Kickstarter's got all kinds of great board game stuff on it. But the people who buy board games on Kickstarter or fund them on Kickstarter, they really, really want their thing to be exclusive. Like when it comes out in retail, they want whatever they bought on Kickstarter to be special in some way because then the retail product, they want it to be first. They want it to have better, whatever these things, and they get really, really bent out of shape when it's not.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Even though they funded it, they made it happen, but they still want theirs to be special.
That's right.
All right. Okay. All right. And last one, monetization strategy changed partway through game life cycle. I'm thinking here of games that sell cosmetic items as microtransactions and then switch to pay to win in the in the middle of the game's life cycle. Right?
Yeah, or even things like the game might have been free to begin with, and then they introduce microtransactions. The game might have been a one-time purchase price, and then they introduce microtransactions, things like that.
Okay, cool. That's our second one. The third one.
Yes.
Okay, tell us about the third category.
Yeah, so this one, monetization of basic quality of life. This one becomes a little bit trickier in terms of, is it actually predatory? Is this like does this depend on the situation and the person and the specific expectations? Because, what is basic quality of life? Like, surely that varies game to game, person to person. But essentially, it's when the player believes that what is meant to be, the core aspects of the game, the core gameplay, is in some way gatekept by payment. So the first one is basically that core aspects of the game are monetized when people think that like core aspects of the story or the map that should be available in either the free or the upfront price or just aren't available without further payment.
Right.
And then same thing with like parts of the game locked behind paywalls, additional content not accessible without payment. But again, it depends on what you think you're entitled to as part of the core game, because some DLCs are seen as fine. And I think there's just almost like a line there as to how much content you can get in the game itself before you start having to pay for additional content.
Yeah, it's interesting what counts as fair, as enough for the game that you buy. And of course, a lot of that is really constituted by our previous experiences and assumptions about how games are supposed to be.
And also the marketing for that game. Like, what do you expect this game to have is based on your prior game experiences, the marketing of this game.
Right. So if I saw Battlefront 2 and I saw, all my favorite characters in the commercial and the game doesn't come with them, right?
Right. Yeah.
I feel cheated, right, in terms of the game that I thought I could expect to get, right?
Yeah. And so I just wanted to say, I think a lot of this as well does just depend on your your preconceptions of what games are and your context that you've been playing games in, and also just who you are and like your community, because there are kind of a lot of biases and norms around these games, and what is, the core aspect of one game isn't the same as the core aspect of another game. And it also depends on your perception of the developers and like whether or not you think a game can have monetization in it to begin with, because to some people that's it. Like when they're playing games, they don't want to think about economic concerns at all. But to others that don't have experience playing games in quite the same context, it would be fine.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Back in the 90s, it was sort of expected that computer games, PC games, would give you 100 hours of gameplay.
100 hours. That was the okay.
That was sort of the expectation, and any game that didn't was considered short, and in a bad way, right? But it turns out the market is actually bigger for games that don't actually require you to play 100 hours, and it was very painful for the core gamer community in the 90s to sort of get on board with the idea that games could be short, could be good games, could be a 20-hour game or even a 5-hour game.
Right. But that's really interesting, right? I feel like you deprived me because I paid for a game, but your game is only 20 hours, but I was expecting 100 because that's what games are supposed to have. Yeah, it's really interesting how much, and, part of, to me, in terms of whether there's anything predatory about this or whether there's anything wrong about this, does seem to involve what the company selling the game understands about how the game will be received by, players in general, right? I mean, if you do know that there is an expectation and, an implicit understanding of what the product would be on both sides, but you're using that in some way to take advantage of the other side, that seems to be a problem. Okay, let's move on to the next one. In-game currency.
Yeah, so that's literally what it says on the tin. It's broadly issues relating to in-game currency. So some people just don't like in-game currency, that they have like personal issues with it. That's general existence of in-game currency. They think that paying for in-game money is weird, or that it brings in all these money issues into games that shouldn't be there. But the ones that I find really interesting are so multiple currency types cause confusion, because with that one you can almost see that like there is something going on there, because there's no reason that you should have to buy a pack of gems for £5 and then you use these gems to buy, I don't know, gold, and then you use this gold to buy something else. Like this, just like, what is this adding to the gameplay? That is clearly designed to get people lost in this purchase process and lose sight of how much they're actually spending.
That's right.
And then another fascinating one to me is the fixed purchase rates, because in quite a lot of games, if you want to buy like 100 gold coins, you can only buy a pack of like 59 or something ridiculous, and then you have to buy another 59 and you end up spending way more, and then you have some currency left over and you maybe want to buy more to use that somehow, and
that's
yeah
that's devious.
it
Right.
is,
So
yeah.
the packs, and Clash Royale has that with when Andy and I did a review of what was that game, Andy? Do you remember Dragon something? We did an
Oh.
episode where we took this game that was kind of an average free to play game.
Yeah. Which game was
and
that?
we looked at things like this, and we talked about the two different currencies and how intentionally not Dragon Age, but Dragon something, right? It's one of our previous episodes. And we looked at how they were trying to essentially make the math really difficult for you. Right. But then you also have things. So in Clash Royale, right, $1 will buy you 80 gems, and 80 gems will buy you 1,000 gold. And there are things that you need essentially 100 gems, but then that means you got to buy 80 gems twice, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
But
In some cases, this is because marketing has said that these are price points that people will pay. So whatever, and you've got some calculations for like what the values of these things should be, and they're not necessarily even to the dollar value price points that marketing has said. These are the price points that people enjoy paying.
Paying. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's why you see 99 cents, $4.99,
right,
$9.99.
Right.
It's why when you buy things at Target or Walmart, you're almost never going to see anything that's cost more than $40, $39.99.
Right.
Okay.
Because Target just knows their audience doesn't like to pay more than $39.99 for anything.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So we got the currency part. Though mind you, that still is not going to explain things like 55 when you need 100,
no,
right?
that's definitely that's super dodgy.
All right. Okay. Pay to win. Sorry, next category.
Yes. So pay to win, something that encompasses sort of ways in which payment can give you advantage over other players. So in some cases, that's literally just that. You're more likely to beat other players. You're more likely to do well if you've spent money on certain items, like better powered weapons, things like that. In some cases, that's sort of encompassed in the subscription feature where you pay more routinely to be better, or to progress through a game better. And in some cases, you are actually you don't feel like you're able to play the game competitively at all unless you've been spending. You might be able to play it on like an amateur fun level, but if you want to actually compete and like earn a ranking in some games, then you basically just can't unless you spend money.
Right. So in that last one, the pay to play competitively, that I thought that they were talking about. So I think I misunderstood that one because I thought that they were talking about like tournaments that you would have to pay an entry fee to join. In which case, it's like I kind of think that that's important because it allows people who want to play at a certain level to not have to wade through the people who are just and this is why this is very common in sports. Tournaments are either invitational. You've been invited to play in this tournament because you're at a certain level, or they cost money to join. And and it keeps the people who are just starting to play out of these super competitive situations where they're not going to do well and they're not going to have a good time anyway.
Unless they're wealthy enough to pay for it.
Right. And if they are, then
right. Or they think that their skill is developed enough, so it's worth paying for. Right. Okay. Pay to win, I think we're familiar with. Okay, now we get to predatory advertising.
Yes. So this one's kind of crazy because some of the adverts that are going on in mobile games are just insane. So quite a lot of the time, like you have these completely like these adverts that are just they're showing completely different gameplay to the game they're advertising. And this is something that players aren't seeing necessarily in games, but it's something that maybe they see an advert for what they think is a cool game. They download the game and it's something completely different. And people feel very cheated by that.
Yeah. And Facebook ads for games tend to be incredibly misleading in terms of what the game actually is.
It's a huge problem. And
that's been the case for a very, very long time.
It's shocking that it's even legal. I'm surprised that nobody's been taken to court over these, because it seems like false advertising.
It's insane. There has actually been one incident in the UK where two games called Homescapes and Gardenscapes were forced to remove or change their adverts because they were just deemed so unrealistic and so unrepresentative of their core gameplay. But that's quite an isolated incident as far as I'm aware, because it was on the news. So it doesn't happen often that they get regulated in this way.
Right. And those are very popular games. Those had millions of players.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And even though their advertising was so off the mark. It's interesting.
My guess is that they had grown to all the people who are going to enjoy the kind of gameplay that they already had, because they were big games. People love these games. And they were trying to grow past that into a market that they weren't already attracting.
I see.
That's my guess.
I
don't have any information.
It's interesting. I feel like people are less likely to regulate game advertising than other product advertising. And I'm dying to know why. Is this because the people who regulate these things are less likely to play games? Is this because these are games, so they're meant to be fun and entertaining, and so they're not expecting very much from them in terms of a serious product that needs to be regulated? Is this because the game is not gonna cost all that much, so they're not going to be worried about that, as they'll be worried about a $1,000 product that is false, that is engaged in false advertising? We need to have an episode on advertising. I think that's a really, really good one. Okay.
Well, interestingly, the ads that I'm thinking about that have been so false have all been for free to play games. So I guess they're getting around they're getting around the legal part of it, because there's no monetary loss. Like if you download a game and it's not the game that you thought you were downloading,
right?
Who cares, because you didn't spend any money on it.
Right.
And but that undervalues our attention and our time.
Right. All right. But yeah, it's interesting. Legally, you can't say you've been financially harmed if you haven't paid anything, so you can't sue. Yeah, that's a really good point, Andy. Okay, so let's. Though, by the way, I mean, I'm thinking about so many trailers that the entire trailer, except for like 5 seconds, is graphics and not the actual game. And that's kind of classic. And you have that for tons and tons and tons of games, right? For a very, very long time. Now, again, some of the stuff with unrealistic presentation is, I think the viewer is supposed to understand that you're just hyping up the game, but this isn't the real game. But, there's a question a lot of times with the idea of deception. It's not deception if you know that, you're not being told the truth. So, we got to do an episode about this, but it's definitely a great topic. Okay. Okay. So keep on going.
Yes.
The lack of information. What's that one?
So I think that one is more. We debated where to put this one, and I think that one's more like it's about the transactions in the game, like how clearly they're expressed in terms of what you're spending and what you're getting out of it. It sort of ties into the product not meeting expectations section as well. It was kind of a close call which section to put it into, but we landed on this one because sometimes it refers to like how items are presented in the store or things like that as well.
Okay. And then we get back to aggressive. So,
yeah.
All right. So what's aggressive advertising here?
So aggressive advertising is literally like ads that interfere with you playing the game. They are everywhere. They are in your way. You can't progress through the game without ads. They are literally obstacles to you playing the game. They interfere with your core gameplay.
Right. I
my
think
mom,
we're all
my mom is
familiar with
playing
those.
just a jigsaw puzzle game on her iPad that is aggressively advertises aggressively to her. Like, and I don't understand. Like, Mom, there are other jigsaw puzzle games out there. You could just get another one that doesn't annoy you with all the advertising. But she's already built up this catalog of puzzles that she's built, and like, she doesn't want to change. So, at what point is that feels like it's predatory at this point, where they're banking on my mom not wanting to change because she has all this built up.
And And I'm assuming that either she's going to stay with it this way, and or she's going to pay if they give her an option to pay to get rid of those. So it's like, we're gonna bug you. You got a free game.
Right.
Bug you. You can leave the game if you want. Bug you until you pay to remove the advertisements.
Right.
Yeah. Do you know, I would love to do research on why people continue to play these games, even though they know that the monetization in them might be unfair or predatory in some way. Because you have people who are so attached to these games for whatever reason, and that's something that shouldn't be considered lightly, because that's how people may fall foul of these practices.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to me, sunken costs is just the explanations for so much here. Okay, we only have 2 more categories. General presence of microtransactions. Okay.
Yeah, so nice and easy, that one. Although, so that one's kind of like, again, it's sort of very perception and expectation based, because some people just don't like the idea of microtransactions, and especially so microtransactions in games that you already pay a fee for upfront for the game. And also, some people believe microtransactions to be, in some cases, quite overpriced, which is true, I think. Sometimes, like, why is a skin like £30 or whatever? But I think this category can be explained by, people thinking that games should be made in this traditional way, where you pay upfront and then you have the game and you can play it as many times as you want. I think it's harder to categorize this as predatory as a whole, because not all microtransactions are bad. Like, you have games like League of Legends, which traditionally haven't been perceived as negatively as a lot of mobile free-to-play games, because they monetize largely through cosmetics. And I think cosmetics are a really good example of what isn't a predatory microtransaction, because they're so choice-based. They don't affect the gameplay. They're a way for you to express yourself should you want it. So, yeah.
Okay, but we still got the idea of
gray area.
For any of this thing of being overpriced. It's still something that,
From my point of view, the general presence of microtransactions is just another business model. It's not unlike having to put another quarter into the machine when you've run out of lives.
Okay.
They have a bad name. And it's not fully unjustified, but not all microtransactions are bad.
Right. Agreed.
Okay, and then you have a catch-all category of other. Okay, so what's our final things in here?
Yes, so teasers, that's when initial part of the game is free, and you might even think that the whole game is free, but you cannot play. You get to a certain point in the game where you can no longer play it, even though it's no longer free.
Right.
Then, sorry, I seem to have lost my diagram.
And I'm assuming the problem here would be that you're under the conception that it is free, and then you find out no, it's only a teaser, right?
Right.
In a way, but also people get invested in the game in the free part, and then they feel almost like they have to keep paying. It's sunk cost fallacy, right? They want to see what happens more in the game because of this free teaser.
I think that investment is like, it was key to the story about the choices gameplay, about the spies. It's key to my mom and what's happening with her and her jigsaw puzzle game. It's like at some point we have to, as game designers, we have to value people's investment. And and that when we're talking about investment, we're talking about like a personal, emotional investment, like not just time and money, but something else too. There's something.
It is interesting, Andy, that Andy brought the attention economy, right, idea here, right, that your attention itself is valuable, right, and important to you, right, and it's interesting how much of one view here can be like, look, your attention is your deal. It's up to you. You make choices about your attention. Why am I responsible as the game company for deciding how you manage your attention, right? I'm presenting you with options. Those options might tempt you. And maybe I can tempt you. There's nothing wrong with tempting you. I think there can be wrong things with tempting you, but certainly this tone could say, look, I can tempt you, but ultimately you're making choices, right? And I think that in the back of our minds, when we criticize these things, we also always need to respond to this very kind of straightforward libertarian voice here. Okay, let's wrap this up. Limited time offers. I think those are pretty clear, right?
Yes, but people see them as predatory because they think that in some cases the designers sort of prey on your like fear of missing out, fear of not getting the specific thing that you can only get in 10 hours, and they end up sacrificing their caution and just, you know, paying to complete if that is the option, or spending more money in this period of time to avoid missing out.
We see this all the time in the real world, right? But in the real world, we can always justify why something might be have a limited time offer. You know, they're trying to get rid of inventory. They're trying to bring people into stores for a certain weekend, or you know, when we're talking about the real world. But I mean, it's all based on FOMO, this fear of missing out, right?
Right.
And I think the real danger here is that there are people, children particularly, who don't have the defenses against this. And and it's about the real risk is that in a video game we can make it almost seamless. We can make the moment of thought of like I need to do this, and the purchase itself a single button, a single tap.
You know, Andy, there is the McRib is back, right? So, you know, Elena, do they have I don't think they have the McRib in McDonald's in the UK, do they?
I don't think so. No, I've not seen it.
Yeah,
it's basically a fake pork rib. It's pork that's been shaped into the shape of pork ribs.
It's disgusting. But the whole marketing thing behind it is that it's a product that comes every once in a while and then goes away and then comes back. So you know it's a limited time only product, and that's the whole marketability of it, right? That they made it special by doing that, and they made it also kind of fun by doing that, right? Now, I think it's fun. I think, you know, if it wasn't for the fact that it tasted like crap, I would totally get it, because, you know, it's fun to have things go and come back, but that's also really different from, again, playing on our desire not to miss out. So, right, part of manipulation is you're playing on the psychological vulnerabilities of people. And in this case, right, if you're particularly playing with the vulnerability of not wanting to miss out on something by putting a limited time offer on it that is, I want to say, disingenuous in some way, right? So compared to the examples that Andy came from, where you know, we're running out, you know,
these are all virtual goods. How can they possibly be running out?
Right. So instead, they're creating artificial scarcity. And they're trying to raise the expected value of something in a way that might undermine your basic ability to make good decisions for yourself, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Now,
pumpkin spice latte.
Oh, come on. But those are seasonal.
Seasonal.
That is true.
What's different? How is that different?
Good question. I don't know, but yes,
pumpkin season.
Yeah, when it is October or November and pumpkin flavored stuff come in, I love it. You know, it fits in with the season. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. Why are certain colors seasonal? Why, you know? That's a good question, Andy. I don't have a great response to that.
Can I just add something as well on unlimited time offers? I think, so this didn't come up in this taxonomy, but it's come up in a couple of my later studies, that with things like limited time offers as well, people really feel the social pressure. Like if they're playing with their friends, or if they're playing in a team in the game, they want to be included in the stuff that comes from these limited time offers. If there's like certain rewards or access to different game content, things like that. So even if they might on their own not necessarily want to be part of this or can't afford it or whatever, they'll still end up doing it if they are surrounded by people also doing it and feeling that pressure. Right.
Especially if you are cueing them so that other people are getting these things.
Right.
Exactly.
And children, again, are much more susceptible to this than adults.
Yes.
Although adults are very susceptible to this as well.
Right. But definitely our ability to control ourselves is better than those of kids.
And the desire to be part of the group is so much stronger for kids and particularly teenagers.
Teenagers, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Battle passes. How do battle passes fit into this?
So battle passes are this additional set of content that generally involve paying for like a time-specific set of content as well. And within itself, it has additional rewards that can be acquired by playing the game or by paying additional money, or in some cases are free upfront for this purchase. But players link this to sometimes they think that their time and money is being exploited. So this is something I noticed in Dota in a different study that I did, where you pay upfront for the battle pass, but then you have to spend loads and loads of time playing it to actually get to the higher levels to acquire these rewards that you're promised in the battle pass. Or, you know, you can pay £100 upfront and then you get straight to level 40. But obviously not everyone can afford that. And so you have people that are wanting all these rewards because they're being marketed as being packaged in this shiny battle pass, and they end up playing lots and lots and lots. Or, you know, in some cases people give in and just pay an additional amount. And actually, like, some battle passes have loot boxes in them as well. So it's, you know, there's a lot of different things that are packaged into this additional set of content.
Okay, hence the need for an episode on this that separates these things. All right, and finally we get to dark patterns.
Yes. So dark patterns sort of borrowed from, that's not exclusive to games. They happen across all types of tech and interfaces, but in games can also be implemented. So an example that someone gave was if you hide a button below another button. So if you click like OK and then you're accidentally buying something. And in this case, it's just explicit, like it's explicit dark design. They're not even trying to like tap into your psychology or anything. They're literally just putting things and you accidentally click them, or hiding things that will let you not make the purchase or cancel things or anything like that.
Another classic one is that they get you used to pressing a certain place on the screen to say no,
right?
And
they swap
say
it.
Yes.
You have a choice, yes or no. It gets you used to like where the things is on the screen is the no, and you just pressed yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Or the X to close the window that actually doesn't close the window, but instead takes you to the purchasing screen. Right.
Exactly.
So so any of this stuff. Okay, look at that. We managed to get through all of them. Okay, and there's so much here.
You can subscribe and listen to all of our episodes wherever you listen to podcasts.